Well, today, as we continue with our series on understanding Revelation, we come to the second series of 7 judgments known as the trumpet judgments. And these will be even more intense than the seal judgments which we looked at together last week. You'll remember that the Lord rolls out the 7th seal, and when he opens it, out come these trumpets announcing the next round of God's judgment on the earth. And these take place in the second half of the tribulation period known as the Great Tribulation. And in chapter 8, verse 6, it says, "Then the 7 angels who had the 7 trumpets prepared to sound them." Verse 7. The first angel sounded his trumpet, and there came hail and fire mixed with blood, and it was hurled down on the earth. A third of the earth was burned up, a third of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. You see, the first trumpet is a judgment on vegetation, and a judgment on vegetation is a judgment on man because we can't live without vegetation. And not only is it a judgment on mankind, but it's also a judgment on animals because they can't live without vegetation either. And it may also be a judgment here on the oxygen in the world as well, because vegetation, as you know, is needed in order to produce the required amount of oxygen, especially in certain places of the world. Now, interestingly here, the specific cause of the hail and fires isn't revealed. But from a scientific point of view, an earthquake, the magnitude of what just takes place in verse 5 prior to this would likely trigger worldwide volcanic eruptions. And these eruptions would spew out massive quantities of flaming lava, which would be blood red in appearance, and it would literally throw this up into the atmosphere, causing huge fires. And the atmospheric effect caused by these eruptions could trigger violent thunderstorms that would produce very large hail. And so the effects of such catastrophic fires would be widespread and devastating destruction, destroying crops and killing people and animals in the process. And then we see the second trumpet, which is blown in verse 8, where it says this: "The second angel sounded his trumpet, and something like a huge mountain all ablaze was thrown into the sea. A third of the sea turned into blood." Verse 9. "A third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed." In this second trumpet judgment, 1/3 of the sea becomes blood-like, and a third of all the creatures in the sea die. Now, this massive object, which looked like a burning mountain, as John describes it, is probably a meteorite or possibly an asteroid. And it's surrounded, we're told, by flaming gases set on fire, obviously by the friction of the Earth's atmosphere as it's coming towards the Earth. You see, the current doomsday scenarios about an asteroid hitting the Earth will eventually come true when this event happens in Revelation. Everyone will see it, either live or on television when it happens and it takes place. And it will hit the earth somewhere in the world's oceans with an explosive power far greater than that of even an atomic bomb. And because all the world's oceans are connected, the devastation created by it will spread across 1/3 of the ocean waters, literally causing 1/3 of the sea to become blood. Now, can you imagine what this is going to be like? I mean, think about it. You've got floating around in 1/3 of all the seas in the world this stinking, rotting, putrefying mess of marine life, which has either been killed or died as a result of this. Giant waves will be created because of the impact, and they will destroy, we're told, even 1/3 of the world's ships on the oceans, capsizing these massive, huge vessels and completely swamping ports. The resulting disruption of commerce and transportation will be absolutely devastating and cause economic chaos around the world. I mean, you can only imagine. And all of this happens because mankind has failed to recognize God's beautiful gift in creation to us. And so God takes it away. You see, man has failed to give glory to God for the wonderful things that he's made, the green grass, the plants and the trees, the sea, and all the life that's contained in it. And it's all because man wouldn't glorify God and honor him for his wonderful gift of creation. And so God takes it away. And then we see the third trumpet in verse 10 where it says this: "The third angel sounded his trumpet, and a great star, blazing like a torch, fell from the sky on 1/3 of the rivers and on the springs of water." Verse 11. The name of the star is wormwood. 1/3 of the stars turned bitter, and many people died from the waters that had become bitter. You see, this third trumpet is God's judgment on the fresh water supply of the world. All the fresh water sources of the world are literally struck with bitterness. And then he destroys 1/3 of them along with everything else that he is destroying. Now, John describes this as a great star which falls from heaven. And the Greek word for star can refer to literally any celestial body other than the sun and the moon. And it's described here as a burning torch. And the fact that John describes it as a burning torch means that it's likely, again, either a meteor or a comet. You see, the term torches were used in the ancient times to describe meteors and comets. They were commonly described by a torch or torches. And it says its fiery debris fell on 1/3 of the rivers and on the springs of water, and it pollutes the fresh water around the globe. And because of its deadly effects, this star will be called wormwood. And the term wormwood, by the way, is mentioned only here in the New Testament. And this is a reference to a shrub whose leaves are used in the manufacture of absinthe, which is a liqueur so toxic that the manufacture of it is actually banned in many countries. It's not allowed. Now, in the Old Testament, wormwood is mentioned 8 times actually, and it's associated each time with bitterness, poison, or even death. And interestingly, 3 of those times that it's used, it's connected with poison water. And whatever the poison represented by the name wormwood we're told that it destroys a third of all the fresh waters. Literally destroys all the fresh water supply of the world. And then we come to the fourth trumpet, which is blown in verse 12, and it says this: "The fourth angel sounded his trumpet, and a third of the sun was struck, a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so that a third of them turned dark. A third of the day was without light, and also a third of the night." Now, God turns the focus from the earth now to the heavens, to the heavenly bodies. Now, can you imagine what something like this will do to the calendar, or what that will do to the schedule? Can you imagine how that will mess up the days and the nights? I mean, think about it. You lose a third of the sun. I can't even begin to think what kind of chaos that will cause in the heavens and also on the earth. A third part of the moon, a third part of the stars are gone, and a third part of them is darkness. You see, this fourth trumpet is against the luminary bodies. Now, we know that this partial eclipse, which is being described here, is going to be temporary because God later on will increase the amount of heat which comes from the sun, and we'll see that later. But in this fourth trumpet judgment, the loss of heat from the sun will cause temperatures to plunge drastically all over the world. And that will severely disrupt the Earth's weather patterns and the sea's tides. And this will lead to even more violent and unpredictable storms and tides. And not only that, but there will be further destruction of crops and loss of both animal and human lives. I mean, you talk about amazing things. This is nothing less than stunning when you see what God is doing in these judgments, and especially in this judgment against the luminary bodies. And I mean, the whole calendar is wiped out. It's gone wacko. And you've got all kinds of weird eclipses going on all over the world. I mean, you talk about chaos. If you want chaos, this is it. And then we read in verse 13 these words: "As I watched, I heard an eagle that was flying in midair call out in a loud voice, 'Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, because of the trumpet blast about to be sounded by the other three angels.'" You see, the dimming of these celestial lights sets the stage for a very startling and ominous announcement. And we're told that as John looked, he heard an eagle flying in midair, saying with a loud voice, "Woe, woe, woe to those who live on the earth because of the remaining blast of the coming three trumpets." Now, what that angel, which looks like an eagle, says is essentially this: if you think the first four trumpet judgments are bad, just wait till you hear the next three trumpet judgments, because you ain't heard nothing yet. You see, the last three trumpets are called the three woes because they are even going to be more intense and more ramped up than what we've seen in these first four trumpets. And when we come together in our study next week, we are going to focus on these final three trumpet judgments. Believe me, there is so much here that I want us to take our next message to focus specifically on what John is told and sees in these three woes, these three coming trumpet judgments, numbers 5, 6, and 7. So stay tuned.